It was the evening of June 14, 1998, when 16-year-old Emily Carter left a small birthday gathering at her best friend Rachel's house just before 10 p.m. The sun had already set, but the neighborhood was familiar and safe, a quiet suburb on the edge of town, where children rode bikes and neighbors waved to each other across trimmed hedges. Emily had made the walk home dozens of times. It was only a 7-minute stroll down Willow Creek Lane to her front door. But that night, something went terribly wrong. Rachel watched Emily walk halfway down the block before turning back inside. There was nothing unusual in her friend's behavior. Emily was in good spirits, laughing about a prank someone had pulled at the party. She had declined a ride home, insisting she wanted some fresh air. She carried nothing but her phone, a pale blue flip phone and a thin gray hoodie tied around her waist. That was the last time anyone would ever see her alive. When Emily didn't return home by 10:30 p.m., her mother, Margaret Carter, called her cell. It rang twice before going to voicemail. At first, she assumed Emily had stopped to talk to someone, or lost track of time. But as the minutes stretched into hours, panic set in. By midnight, Margaret had called the police. Officers responded quickly, but told her it was too early to file a missing person report. They suggested waiting until morning. Margaret didn't wait. She and her husband drove the route themselves with flashlights, calling her name. Nothing. By sunrise, local authorities launched a formal search. The Carter family's front lawn filled with police cars, K-9 units, and concerned neighbors. The entire stretch of Willow Creek Lane was canvassed. Backyard sheds, garages, wooded trails, nearby every inch was searched. A pair of sneakers were found near a drainage ditch 2 blocks away. But they didn't belong to Emily. There were no tire marks, no dropped items, no struggle, and no witnesses. It was as if Emily had simply vanished into the air. Rumors began to swirl. Some claimed they heard a car speeding through the area around 10 p.m. Others said they saw a man in a black hoodie watching the party from the trees. But no statement was ever confirmed. Emily's phone remained off. No bank activity. No sightings. No goodbye messages. And no motive. There was no reason for her to run away. She was an honor student, close with her family, and excited about an upcoming school trip to New York. Within just 48 hours, her case became one of the most baffling disappearances the town had ever seen. In the days immediately following Emily Carter's disappearance, the entire town of Millersfield seemed to shift into a state of stunned disbelief. Flyers, with Emily's face bright-eyed brunette, smiling beneath the words missing, were taped to stop signs, coffee shop windows, and gas station doors. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search effort, forming human chains to sweep through wooded trails and abandoned lots. The local high school suspended classes for 2 days as students helped in any way they could, but despite the overwhelming response, the search yielded nothing. Not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not a single clue. Detectives brought in search dogs and infrared drones. The nearby Willow Creek, which sometimes overflowed during heavy rains, was partially drained and combed by divers. Helicopters flew overhead while search teams scoured the forest line, guided by maps marked in red. But after 5 days of exhaustive effort, the momentum began to fade. Leads were called in, but most turned up false mistaken identity, attention seekers, or confused locals recalling unrelated events. Every hopeful phone call began to end with the same heavy silence. Investigators interviewed Rachel and all the other guests at the birthday party. No one recalled anything suspicious. One neighbor claimed to have seen a parked car near the woods around the time Emily vanished, but couldn't describe the vehicle. A delivery driver reported spotting someone running across the road that night, but they weren't even sure if it was a male or female. These vague, conflicting accounts only deepened the frustration of the investigators. A town that had always felt so open and familiar had suddenly grown thick with shadows. For the Carter family, each passing hour was like a stone added to their chest. Margaret refused to leave the house for more than a few minutes at a time, afraid Emily might somehow return. Her father, Daniel, drove endlessly around town, retracing her walking path until his eyes blurred from exhaustion. He printed his own maps and built timelines, convinced he could find a pattern the police had missed. Their living room became a war room, covered in notes, pins, and highlighted articles. But every theory hit a wall. Every trail went cold. By the 3rd week, detectives began to shift their tone. Without evidence of abduction, they started to quietly consider the possibility that Emily had run away. A theory the Carters angrily rejected. Emily had no reason to disappear voluntarily, no history of depression, no secret relationships, no hidden conflict. She had plans, goals, dreams, and yet, the more time passed, the less attention the case received. Reporters stopped calling. Volunteers stopped showing up, and in the silence that followed, a chilling realization began to settle in. Emily Carter hadn't just gone missing. She had been erased. It was a cold, overcast morning in late October of 2001. Just over 3 years since Emily Carter vanished, when something unusual arrived at the Carter family's mailbox. Margaret Carter, now hollow-eyed and aging beyond her years, had come to dread the daily ritual of checking for updates that never came: bills, junk mail, the occasional sympathy card from distant relatives who had moved on. But that morning, tucked between a grocery flyer and an electric bill, was an envelope with no return address, postmarked from within Millersfield itself. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. Just one word: Carter, not Margaret, not Emily's family. Just that dot inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, torn at the edges, folded twice. The message was handwritten in neat, almost careful print, using what appeared to be a black marker. There were no threats, no accusations, no signatures, just 10 chilling words. She's not far. Look where the ground bleeds. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no smudges or marks. Police immediately ran forensics, but the envelope had been wiped clean. Whoever sent it had planned this moment, and they had waited 3 years to act. The phrase itself, "where the ground bleeds," struck everyone differently. Detectives debated whether it referred to a crime scene, a location, or was merely a cruel taunt. Some thought it meant an area with red soil, while others believed it could reference an old battlefield or burial ground. But Millersfield had no known history of either. Others thought the sender might be referring to a strawberry field on the edge of town. Once locally known as the Red Field, where fruit would rot in the soil after the farm shut down in the early 90s, it had become overgrown and, mostly forgotten, avoided by kids who believed it was haunted. Margaret Carter was both terrified and electrified. For the first time in years, there was movement. A sign that someone knew something, or worse, had been watching all along. She begged the police to investigate immediately, but the field wasn't considered high priority. Detectives, now assigned 24 active cases, chalked it up as a hoax. Still, a few officers agreed to accompany Margaret and Daniel Carter to the field, mostly to ease their minds. What they found that day was overgrowth, weeds, and nothing immediately alarming. No signs of digging. No unusual scents, just silence. But something about the place felt off, a stillness that didn't sit right. After that visit, the letter was filed away, just one more dead-end lead in a long cold case. But Margaret couldn't let it go. She read those words every night like a prayer. She's not far. Look where the ground bleeds. The note haunted her, whispered to her. She believed it was a breadcrumb. She believed someone had been there with Emily, and that whoever wrote that message wasn't done speaking. The only question was, why did they wait 3 years to say something? And what were they trying to lead her to? For years, the old strawberry farm on the edge of Millersfield had been abandoned, its once symmetrical rows of produce now overrun with weeds, vines, and brambles. Locals called it the Red Field, a name that had nothing to do with blood, but everything to do with memory. In the summers of the late 80s, children would stain their fingers picking overripe berries that bled into the soil. But since its closure in 1993, the land had become a place of silence and superstition. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was just forgotten. But no one, especially not children, went near it anymore. After the mysterious letter arrived, the Red Field became a place of renewed interest for Margaret and Daniel Carter. Something about the phrasing "where the ground bleeds" had triggered an old memory in Margaret's mind. She remembered taking Emily there as a child, watching her giggle as she ran down the rows. The thought that her daughter might somehow be connected to this decaying land made her skin crawl. When she brought her theory to the police a second time, she was told gently that nothing had been found during the initial sweep. But Margaret insisted. She knew it meant something, and this time, someone listened. Detective Laura Mendel Newley, assigned to the cold case files, decided to take another look. She had a gut feeling the letter wasn't a hoax. With permission, a specialized cadaver dog team from out of state was brought in to search the field. The team arrived in early November, just as frost began to settle on the ground. The wind was sharp and constant. The field stretched out in eerie silence, dead plants rustling like whispers. What had once been a place of childhood joy now looked like something out of a forgotten dream turned nightmare. The first day of the search yielded nothing but broken fencing, rusted tools, and the collapsed remains of a barn that had caved in. Years ago, the dogs were restless but unfocused. The second day passed much the same. But on the third day, one of the dogs, an aging bloodhound named Greta, stopped at a patch of earth about 40 yards from the tree line. She didn't bark, she sat, wind, then began to dig. Trainers marked the area and signaled the rest of the team. Within minutes, another dog joined in, pawing at the same spot. It wasn't random. Something was there, something deep below the surface. Excavation began immediately, under tight supervision. The ground was soft, the layers beneath disturbed in a way that didn't match the surrounding soil. Shovels gave way to spades, which gave way to gloved hands. About 2 feet down, a thick foul odor began to rise from the dirt. No one said a word. Even the dogs backed away. Moments later, the tip of something pale and curved emerged from the earth, a human rib bone, partially intact, worn down by time. As they kept digging, more fragments appeared, bones, scraps of fabric, and the edge of what looked like a tattered backpack. Its zipper rusted shut, but it wasn't Emily. Not yet. The discovery at the red field sent a tremor through the entire Millersfield Police Department. Word spread quickly that human remains had been uncovered in connection with the Carter case. Reporters descended on the site. Caution tape stretched across the tree line, and forensic tents were set up overnight. But as the recovery team worked carefully through the grave, it became clear the remains were not recent, and the identity would soon shake the investigation to its core. The skeletal structure suggested a female teen, much like Emily, but the timeline didn't fit. The body had been in the ground longer than 3 years, perhaps closer to 6. Personal items recovered near the remains gave investigators their first real clue. A badly faded canvas diary, soaked and unreadable, and a decaying bracelet with tiny plastic letter beads that spelled out, Amanda. Dental records confirmed it within 48 hours. Amanda Hale, a 15-year-old girl, who had vanished from a neighboring town in 1995. She had never been connected to Emily's case before. In fact, Amanda's disappearance had barely been covered by media at the time. It had been chalked up to a troubled home life and assumed runaway. Now, the truth was beginning to surface. Amanda hadn't run away. She had been buried in the same town where Emily vanished. The shocking revelation changed everything. 2 girls, 2 towns. 2 disappearances, years apart, now linked by a single patch of earth. Investigators scrambled to cross-reference timelines, locations, and any overlapping details between the 2 cases. There were eerie similarities. Both girls had disappeared while walking home alone in quiet neighborhoods. Both had attended local high schools. Both were last seen around 10 p.m., but there was one unsettling difference. Amanda had disappeared 3 years before. Emily, which meant whoever was responsible, had done this before, and likely waited to do it again. Forensics revealed Amanda had been bound, and trauma to her skull suggested blunt force. A thin wire, likely used for restraint, was still tangled in the soil. There were no defensive wounds, no signs she'd fought back. It was a quick, calculated kill. The positioning of her body, shallowly buried and hidden beneath rotting vegetation, suggested the killer hadn't intended to conceal her forever, just long enough. The more detectives looked at it, the more it seemed like a message. As if the person who left Amanda there wanted her to be found, eventually. But what disturbed investigators the most wasn't the body or the clues, it was the timing. Why now? Why had someone sent that letter, after all this time, pointing them to this specific spot? Had they gotten cold feet? Or were they watching the investigation from the shadows, waiting to see what happened next? More horrifying still, if Amanda was buried here, could it mean Emily was, too? And if so, why in a different grave? Why separate the 2? The implications began to swirl in detectives' minds. This was no isolated incident. This was a pattern, and somewhere, in the dirt of the red field, that pattern was just beginning to take shape, just as investigators were beginning to catalog the disturbing evidence surrounding Amanda Hale's remains. Cadaver dogs began reacting again, this time near the far eastern edge of the red field, where the overgrowth was thicker and swamp-like pockets had formed from years of rainfall. At first, the team assumed it was residual scent transfer from Amanda's grave, but the dogs were insistent. 2 of them stopped at the same spot and refused to move. The soil here was wetter, looser, and far more treacherous. Still, after what had just been discovered, there was no question. They had to dig. The excavation began that same afternoon. Unlike Amanda's grave, which had been shallow and careless, this new site was deep and deliberate, almost surgically constructed. Layers of plastic and burlap had been placed over the body, making detection from above nearly impossible. As investigators dug deeper, a sickening familiarity began to emerge. A shoe, clump of matted brown hair. A bracelet identical to one Emily had been photographed wearing just weeks before she vanished. When the body was fully exhumed, the identification didn't take long. This time, there was no doubt. It was Emily Carter. Her remains were intact, but posed unnaturally, knees tucked to her chest, hands folded under her chin. Unlike Amanda, who had died violently, Emily's bones showed no fractures or trauma. No ligature marks. No sign of external injuries. Toxicology was impossible due to decomposition, but forensic experts believed she may have been sedated, possibly even starved, before death. That theory would have been horrifying enough until they found what had been placed beside her body. A small Polaroid photograph, its edges curled and yellowed, half melted by moisture, yet chillingly visible. In the photograph were two girls, one unmistakably Emily, the other clearly Amanda Hale. Both appeared alive, though terrified, seated against a concrete wall in what looked like a dimly lit basement. Their wrists were bound in front of them. A single hanging bulb cast a long shadow behind them. Emily's eyes were red from crying. Amanda's face was bruised. Written in marker, along the bottom edge of the photo were the words, July 9, 1999, they cried for days. That date was over a year after Amanda's disappearance, and almost a year before Emily's, which meant they had been held together for months, maybe longer. The discovery rocked the investigative team to its core. The idea that Emily and Amanda had both been alive well after their disappearances, kept somewhere secret, only to be buried years apart in the same field, suggested a level of planning, control, and cruelty no one had expected. This was no random predator. This was someone methodical, someone local who had watched the town, selected victims, and made sure to cover their tracks until now. But perhaps the most unsettling question wasn't how Emily and Amanda had died. It was how many more photos, like that one, might still exist, and who might be in them. In the weeks following the discovery of Emily Carter and Amanda Hale's bodies, the investigation into their deaths shifted into overdrive. Every detective assigned to the case felt a gnawing urgency, as if time itself were running out. Though no one could explain why. The Polaroid photo had changed everything. It wasn't just a clue, it was evidence of captivity, of a hidden place, a sick mind, and of two girls who had spent their final days in fear, not forgotten. But for all its horror, the photo left behind more questions than answers. Where was that basement? Who took the picture? And worse, were there others? Crime scene analysts pored over the photograph for any hidden detail, watermarks, light angles, shadows, background features. One faint detail stood out: the edge of a red spray-painted X, partially visible on the concrete wall behind Amanda. No records existed of any property, abandoned or otherwise, containing such a marking. Investigators canvassed old buildings across 3 counties, checking basements, storm shelters, even irrigation tunnels. But nothing matched. It was as if the location in the photograph had been built or used specifically for that purpose, then erased. Detectives started to suspect the possibility of a kill room, purposefully created and destroyed. Hauntingly, the Polaroid was not the only item recovered from Emily's grave. Beneath the folds of her deteriorated hoodie, investigators discovered a small black cassette tape, wrapped tightly in plastic and twine. It had no label, no markings. Forensic labs cleaned and restored it, and when they finally played it, what came through the speakers turned even the most seasoned officers cold. Static, then breathing, then a faint voice, female, whispering, "He says we'll be next. If we try to run." Another voice, Amanda, perhaps, whimpers something unintelligible. Then footsteps, then silence. The tape cut off after 27 seconds, but the effect was permanent. To this day, investigators debate whether the tape was left intentionally as a clue, or as a final taunt. Either way, it confirmed what they had feared. The girls had been held, watched, and likely manipulated for an extended period of time. But by whom? Background checks on every registered sex offender, maintenance worker, substitute teacher, and delivery driver in the area turned up nothing suspicious. No match to DNA. No fingerprints. It was as though the person responsible had been right under their noses, hiding in plain sight. Protected by a mask no one had thought to question. And perhaps that's what haunts them most, the void. The blank space where a suspect should be. After all the digging, all the discovery, no arrests were ever made. The photograph remains sealed in a secure evidence locker. The tape is archived in a vault, too disturbing to be released publicly. And the case, though never officially closed, sits in a limbo that chills everyone who touches it. Some officers refused to work on it after hearing the tape. Others reported nightmares of girls crying behind concrete walls. As for Margaret and Daniel Carter, they moved away a year later, leaving behind a house where Emily's bedroom remained untouched, as though she might one day walk back in, as though the photo might not be the last thing she ever left behind. To this day, the case of Emily Carter and Amanda Hale remains unsolved. The photograph, the cassette tape, the anonymous letter, all of it points to someone meticulous, calculating, and still unknown. Despite countless man-hours, new technologies, and nationwide exposure, the person responsible has never been found. No fingerprints, no DNA, just 2 graves and a trail of unanswered questions. What haunts investigators most isn't just what happened, it's what might still be out there. Was Emily the final victim? Or just one in a line of others yet to be uncovered? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all, is the person who did this still watching?
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.